So, welcome back to California Noir, six films. Today it's John Borman's crime thriller Point Blank from 1967. We'll follow the usual pattern. I'll lecture on the film and its background for about 50 minutes. Then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll have 35 minutes of discussion. You've got a terms and concept sheet to follow along in my lecture and in discussion. So, I want to deal with the issue of neo-noir first. Point Blank is often called the founding film of the neo-noir movement in Hollywood. It's viewed as the equivalent of Double Indemnity, the founding film of classic noir, which we saw. Well, what do we mean by neo-noir? That question was raised by Doug Garcia in our last session. So it's an interesting question. I'd like to address it. Classic film noir developed in Hollywood at a particular time in the 1940s. These were black and white, cheap crime films with deeply shadowed cinematography, grim storylines, flawed protagonists, and downbeat endings. This classic noir black and white style was eventually overtaken by sheer technical progress in movie making. That is, Technicolor photography became the usual, and so did widescreen CinemaScope. So this particular black and white style came to an end. John Borman in 1967 actually wanted to make Point Blank in black and white because he was enamored of classic film noir, but he was overruled by the MGM executives who feared nobody would come to see the film if it was shot in black and white. That would just be too old-fashioned. But this doesn't mean that Technicolor widescreen Point Blank, Panavision actually, is not a film noir. As our friend Bill Park says, style changed, not genre. In 1966 also, the Motion Picture Production Code was loosened. This was the work of Jack Valenti, the former White House Chief of Staff, now president of the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA. The blanket censorship of the old Hays office was replaced by 4 different categories of film, including for general audiences, G, and for mature audiences, M. Under this system, M for mature films could show more sexuality and violence than the strict censorship of the 30s, 40s, and 50s had permitted. This meant a change not just in style, but in content. But the MPA code was in such chaotic flux in 1967 that Point Blank never got a rating at all. As was said last week also, this looser production code certainly led to one particular major change in noir content. After 1966, noir films you get where the rich and powerful bad guy gets away with his crimes. In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, nobody got away with crime because the Motion Picture Production Code absolutely forbade criminals getting away unpunished. Their job was to guard public citizen morality. But as we'll see in both Point Blank and later in Chinatown, the smart and powerful escape punishment completely. Now, in Hitchcock's Vertigo, which we saw last week, evil Gavin Elster ends up enjoying his murdered wife's Madeline's money in Europe. He gets away with it, and that's in 1958. But Hitchcock was Hitchcock, and even Hitchcock had to struggle with Paramount over allowing such an ending. In fact, they demanded he make an alternative ending where Elster is captured in Europe. Hitchcock cut that. But fundamentally, the rich and powerful getting away with it was a new post-1966 element. Even so, I think one can argue that film noir as a Hollywood movement and California noir as its most important subgenre has been in continual production since at least Double Indemnity. The basic elements of the noir plot have remained the same: the flawed or damaged protagonist, the complex crime at the center, must be a complex crime, the femme fatale, the downbeat ending, and an overriding cynicism about the way the world works. These were the elements of film noir in the 40s and in widescreen Technicolor film noir too. It's reasonable to underscore difference and to categorize these post-1966 films separately in a category as neo-noir. But it's also reasonable to stress the continuities and just to call the results film noir after 1966. This is a case of what's called lumpers versus splitters. I am instinctively a lumper, and for me, even significant differences aren't that important as long as the general thrust of things is the same. But other people are instinctively splitters and really want to draw boundaries and say, this is not that. But for me, the loosening of the production code after 1966, in fact, allowed an intensification of the traditional cynical film noir worldview because it allowed the rich and powerful to escape punishment. So even though Point Blank is in super Panavision widescreen and in brilliant Technicolor, and even though it comes with an intentionally fragmented late 1960s style of narrative, the basic noir elements remain the basic noir elements. We have the flawed and damaged protagonist, Walker, the femme fatale, Walker's treacherous and self-destructive wife, Lynn, the same overall social corruption, the same gloomy ending. Point Blank also remains true to the basic linear structure of noir thrillers, even with all of the fragmented narrative. That is, it's a step-by-step investigation where our flawed protagonist pursues justice. The major content difference from the old days is that the criminal mastermind, Fairfax, played by Keenan Wynn, he gets away with it. So as usual, I like to review the basics of the plot so we're all on the same page during the lecture and discussion. So Walker, played by Lee Marvin, is a criminal who helps his friend Mal Reese rob a huge haul of drug money. The robbery happens at night in the abandoned Alcatraz prison in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Mal Reese kills the two drug couriers, and then he shoots Walker too, point blank, twice in the stomach in order to steal Walker's share of the money. Walker's wife, Lynn, played by Sharon Acker, is in league and in love with the treacherous Mal. They leave Walker for dead inside Alcatraz. Despite his gunshot wound, Walker somehow staggers out of the prison and slips into the water of San Francisco Bay. In the next scene, we see him alive, but now prematurely gray, returning to Alcatraz Island on a tour boat. The tour boat's guide says, the fact is no one has ever escaped alive from Alcatraz. On the boat, a man named Yost, played by Keenan Wynn, gives Walker the address in Los Angeles where Mal Reese and Walker's wife Lynn are now living together. Walker is infuriated, flies to LA to take revenge on Mal and Lynn and to get back his share of the robbery money. He figures it's $93,000. That'd be about $900,000 today. So it's a lot of money. Yost guides Walker, this mysterious Yost guides Walker at every step in his revenge crusade. Walker finds Lynn's apartment in LA. He confronts her. Lynn then appears to commit suicide. Meanwhile, Mal Reese is no longer living with her, but is now part of a corporatized mafia called the Organization. Walker spends the rest of the movie hunting down one ever higher organization man after another, always demanding his $93,000. He takes on Mal Reese, then Brewster, then Carter, played by Carol O'Connor, doing an early version of his Archie Bunker character, and finally Fairfax. Attempts to kill Walker fail. Walker is helped by Lynn's sister Chris, played by Angie Dickinson. They develop a stormy sexual relationship. They find Mal, who falls to his death during a fight on his penthouse balcony, but no money. Then Walker goes up the mob organization on his quest for his $93,000. But the fact is, none of the organization men has ready access to that scale of cash, the scale of cash that Walker wants. The mob is a modern corporation now, and everyone uses credit cards. In the film, there's a great scene, it's the most famous scene in the film, actually, of Walker arriving at LAX from San Francisco, marching, scowling down a long, bleak LAX airport corridor, his heavy shoes clomping and echoing the very soul of vengeance. The implacable clomping of his heavy shoes can be even heard in Lynn's apartment as she wakes up and as she goes through the day and even goes to the beauty parlor. This isn't a flashback or a flash forward, though there are plenty of those in Point Blank. This is something new, a flash sideways, a way to convey the idea of simultaneity. She's doing all these things while the Walker is arriving in LAX. But it also turns out that vengeance bent Walker was all along merely being used as a tool in organizational infighting. Fairfax, the head of the organization, was also the mysterious man Yost, who kept giving Walker advice and who gave Walker Lynn's address, setting his quest for vengeance in motion. But Fairfax was merely using Walker to eliminate his rivals from power within the organization, one by one. Thanks to Walker, Fairfax is successful and he gets away with it. So throughout the film, it turns out that ferocious, implacable Walker was merely the fall guy. Fall guy at the beginning of the film, fall guy all the way through it. To paraphrase Noah Cross in Chinatown, you may think you know what you're dealing with, Mr. Walker, but believe me, you don't. In the last scene, we find Walker suddenly back on Alcatraz. The victorious Fairfax leaves a parcel in the courtyard for him, supposedly the $93,000. But Walker literally disappears into the darkness instead, doesn't pick up the money, he just disappears, and that's the end. Talking about Walker brings us to Lee Marvin, without whom the film would never have been made. Marvin appears in almost every single scene in Point Blank, and no actor in the 60s was remotely like him. He came of age when anti-heroic leading men, Marlon Brando, James Dean, had risen to prominence, and he was one of them in that sense, but Marvin was even less traditional of a movie star. He possessed not an inkling of glamour. On screen, he looked like someone who'd never been an innocent child. His cigarette-tortured voice sounded like a low rumble in the earth. The film loves Marvin's slab-like face and icy, stoic demeanor, through which the audience can project their own secret power fantasies. Gee, to be like that, wouldn't that be great? When Chris pounds furiously on his chest just to get some sort of reaction from him, he's impermeable. This power fantasy was the secret compact between the on-screen criminal and the audience of ordinary people that I talked about in our first lecture. We just want to look at it. In fact, Lee Marvin often played a straight-out villain. He was the insanely sadistic thug in The Big Heat, 1953. Marlon Brando's vicious sidekick in The Wild One, 1954. The vile, grinning outlaw in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. A hired killer in Don Siegel's The Killers, 1964, a pioneering Technicolor film noir. But Marvin's career suddenly changed when he became a huge Hollywood star after his Oscar-winning performance in Cat Ballou, 1965. A really odd choice for the Best Actor Oscar from a very weird comedy Western. But having won the Best Actor award, Marvin could now write his own ticket. And he'd followed Cat Ballou with another hit Western, The Professionals, well worth seeing. His personal endorsement he was so influential in Hollywood that his personal endorsement played an important role in getting his friend, the rebel director Sam Peckinpah's ultra-brutal Western, The Wild Bunch, into production. Without his support, the Peckinpah would never have gotten the money to make the film. Marvin had just finished starring in The Dirty Dozen, a violent World War II thriller. It was Marvin's attraction to the character of Walker in Point Blank that convinced MGM to go ahead and invest in the film. In 1967, no one in Hollywood could say no to him. After 17 long years in the gold fields, he'd struck it rich. And Marvin was more than an actor in the film. He had a direct hand in casting. And John Boorman, who was directing a major movie only for the second time, he was very young, and directing it in a foreign country, he was British, relied also on Marvin in revising the shooting script as they went along. Boorman has written that Marvin wasn't merely a great acting talent, but tremendously charismatic as a person, though Big Trouble when drunk, which he often was. It's rare for an actor to have had so much influence on the director and on the finished product. Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard comes to mind. The real Lee Marvin had served in the Marines in World War II and had been badly wounded on Saipan in 1944 in a Japanese ambush which killed most of his company of 200 men. He'd been afraid, seen many of his friends killed. He'd done a lot of killing himself. Marvin always declared that his experience as a Marine in the Pacific War hadn't been heroic, but terrible and traumatic. So Marvin was attracted to the character Walker, who was so traumatized and so wounded, traumatized and wounded by the betrayal by his wife and best friend, who left him for dead. He identified with Walker. He wanted to show Walker's trauma and maybe his own. That's why he agreed to do the movie. Because Lee Marvin's schedule was so tight, he was committed to other pictures. John Boorman had to begin shooting while the script itself of Point Blank still actually needed work. So what happened was that Boorman got Lee Marvin's daily feedback as the script was being drafted. Marvin was thus a very important creator in what we see. Boorman accepted that Marvin knew how Walker would react in every situation. It was the opposite, if you think about it, of how Hitchcock on Vertigo totally controlled his actors. This is the opposite of that. To Boorman, it wasn't simply that Marvin was famous and very talented. He thought that the film put Marvin in touch with the bitter wisdom derived from his old Marine wounding. Quote, Marvin knew what it felt like to be dead and live again. How tough was Lee Marvin? This tough. In the scene where the badly wounded Walker splashes into San Francisco Bay to escape from Alcatraz, the stuntman refused to do the scene. The water in the bay was too cold and the current was too dangerous. So Marvin did the scene himself, and you can see it in the film. As Walker, Marvin also wields a huge Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum pistol. That pistol is the same model Clint Eastwood would make famous 4 years later in Dirty Harry, our next film. Walker's huge gun was Marvin's idea, but for him, the point of the gun was not power, as it is in Dirty Harry. It's to stress the gap between the potency Walker wants and his failure to achieve the revenge he seeks. Shooting up an empty bed is really symbolic of that. It was also Marvin's idea to exaggerate the recoil of the gun. His arm goes wild when he shoots, so that his revenge weapon keeps slamming him backwards. That huge pistol is center stage in the advertising posters for Point Blank put out by MGM, the same sort of thing as you see in the posters for Dirty Harry 4 years later. The posters, though, give it a cruder meaning than what Marvin was thinking. MGM knew what would sell to the audience, which was the idea of the pistol as power, which was not what Marvin was thinking at all. So I want to now turn about how California this film is. Uh, John Boorman was from Britain. He'd never been to California. And what you see in the film is how impressive California was to him, both in a positive and a negative way. He originally intended to film Point Blank in San Francisco. The reason was he'd heard so much about it and he loved Hitchcock's Vertigo, but he'd never visited. But when Boorman saw San Francisco, he decided that the city's steep hills and brightly painted wooden Victorian houses were unsuitable for his movie, which he intended to be blank, to be bleak. No, Los Angeles had to be the place to center Point Blank, a vast horizontal city, not a vertical city, standing on deadly earthquake faults, surrounded on three sides by desert. The wide, flat spaces and blank, towering, modernistic skyscrapers of 1967 Los Angeles. Now, you have to remember that in Britain in the mid-60s, there aren't these huge skyscrapers yet. Those skyscrapers suited Boorman's purpose much better than San Francisco. That is, the creation of the city as emptiness, reflecting Walker's psychology. The sun-baked sky, the wide empty streets, the propped-up inhuman-scale freeways, and the waste spaces underneath them. Car lots lined with glaring metal. Cemeteries where massive machines scoop out impersonal graves. Looming, faceless skyscrapers. The enormous concrete bleak storm drains of the Los Angeles River flood control system. Gray concrete and huge electric power grids everywhere. That's perfect. The first time that the storm drain at that particular place, the 6th Street Bridge, was made into a film was in the terrible science fiction horror film Them, where giant ants live in those tunnels, radioactive ants. But the effect is still the same of this bleak surrounding. So while Vertigo last week had focused on San Francisco as the vertical city, Point Blank is intentionally played out in the LA flatlands, vast and horizontal. Here's Boorman's impression on his first visit to LA. Quote, "The city was as mythic and powerful as King Arthur. I rented a car at the airport and drove down the length of Sunset Boulevard in time to see the sun sink into the Pacific. I spent my time driving aimlessly around the freeways. It was concrete over sand. That's what the city was. The people had lost their bearings and seemed to me to be impersonating humans. I longed to make a film there." But that's the first and most impressive California landscape in the film. But the second Point Blank landscape is the opposite of the overbright and wide open LA. It's Alcatraz prison, where the film begins and where Walker periodically returns in flashbacks. A dark, enclosed space, claustrophobic, a living grave. And Boorman in the last scene uses Fort Point, opposite Alcatraz, to impersonate the prison, a place equally gloomy and bleak, huddled underneath the soaring promise of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's the place where Walker finally learns the truth of how he has been manipulated all the way through the film. It's the place where in Vertigo, the false Madeline jumped into San Francisco Bay. And there's a third California landscape in Point Blank. It's only glimpsed briefly, but it's a relief from Boorman's Los Angeles as a wasteland. It's the house of Lynn's sister, Chris. It's the only LA structure we see that is made out of wood, the only place surrounded by foliage and trees. Chris's color scheme inside her organic house is a warm honey yellow. It's the golden California dream. Chris's house is also the only place we see Walker relax but only briefly. And Chris is also the only person in the film who's not motivated by money. She's insulted when Walker offers her $1,000 for her role in the death of Mal Reese. Evidently, the thing is, she loves Walker. I want to talk now about how the audience is disoriented in this film, intentionally by the director. Boorman loved Vertigo from the moment he first saw it at age 25. It was, he says, a revelation. And he'd actually wanted Kim Novak to play the part of Chris. Why not get Madeline herself? That would have been fantastic. But nothing came of it, unfortunately. Nevertheless, Boorman couldn't resist using grim old Fort Point under the soaring Golden Gate Bridge, where Madeline jumped into the bay for the final confrontation between Walker and Fairfax. But Boorman in Point Blank also went for plenty of Vertigo-like disorientation of the audience and shifts in reality played on the audience. Here are two. After Walker finds his wife Lynn dead in the bedroom of her apartment, an apparent suicide, he walks back into the living room and looks bleakly out the window. He returns to the bedroom, but now it's empty except for a bare mattress and a white cat. What happened to Lynn's body? Who knows? Where are Lynn's things? Who knows? Walker goes into the living room again, and now the living room is bare also. Walker squats in a corner. The room resembles a prison cell. Boorman said he thought of the apartment as a manifestation of Walker's inner torment. Or there's this extraordinary sequence. When Walker, so traumatized by betrayal by his wife and his best friend, finally kisses his wife's sister, Chris, and they begin to make love, suddenly Chris transforms into her sister, the treacherous Lynn. Walker then transforms into Mal, so now it's Mal kissing Lynn. Then Lynn, in turn, transforms into Chris, so now it's Mal kissing Chris, taking Walker's place again. Finally, Walker returns to being himself, with Chris on top, kissing him. Boorman is explicit that this sequence was inspired by the traumatized Scotty Ferguson's famous 360-degree kiss of Judy, or is it Madeline, in Judy's apartment in Vertigo. The scene where Scotty embraces Madeline, or Judy as Madeline, and even the background changes to reflect his memories instead of the real room he's in. This is how influential Vertigo was 10 years after it was made. Boorman also intentionally fragmented the storyline with frequent flashbacks and flash forwards and even a flash sideways. These constantly interrupt the ongoing real-time narrative of Walker's search for revenge, and they come without any warning or marking. Suddenly you're in the past or the future. They're very different from Double Indemnity, where you see Walter Neff picking up the dictaphone to talk, and then you're in a flashback. There's no warning that these are flashbacks, so you don't know what's going on. Suddenly you're in the past, or maybe it's the future. The timeline of what you see is constructed to be confusing. When the film was audience tested in the San Fernando Valley in the summer of 1967, a typical audience response was, "The film editors must have been drunk." One major technical innovation did come with Point Blank, though, and something we started to talk about a couple of weeks ago. Boorman's use of hidden, small, wireless microphones. These were snapped under the clothes, very close to an actor's mouth. This innovation suddenly eliminated the huge overhead boom microphones, which constrained actors' movements and which we talked about with Sunset Boulevard. Boorman used 125 of these small microphones in the filming of the movie. It revolutionized the freedom of movement of the actors, freeing them up from the constraints and interference of the boom mic. And at the same time, these small wireless mics actually produced purer sound dialogue. Even with boom mics, it was often the case that actors had to come back for what was called looping, which was actually their voices hadn't made it very well onto the soundtrack, so they were called back to the studio to say their lines in a controlled environment. But with the small wireless mics, and they're wireless, so they're not attached to anything, you get much greater freedom of action. So that's modern, and so is the organization that I want to talk about. Left for Dead on Alcatraz, Walker's quest to become whole again via gaining the $93,000 he's owed for the murderous heist at the beginning, but he's up against the organization. The organization is in one way, and that's with a capital O, the organization is in one way a traditional gang, engaged in all sorts of crime and violence. But if the organization is the mafia, it's certainly not the mafia of The Godfather. Rather, the organization is criminalized 1960s capitalism. The bad guys are guys in expensive suits, operating from sleek offices in blank modernistic skyscrapers. The higher-ups in the organization all have bland Anglo names: Reese, Brewster, Carter, Fairfax. Actually, Borman wanted all of them to have blue eyes. Their profits take the form of credit cards and stock portfolios, not cash. The organization even has its own bland corporate name, Multiplex Products, with headquarters in a monolithic LA high-rise, complete with a smartly dressed receptionist. A man's worth in this crime outfit is measured by his ability to bring in profit. Well, that's like the working of any large corporation. It's simply that the take-ons came from crime. The reason Mal Reese stole Walker's share of the drug heist in the first place was to buy his way back into the corporation hierarchy after he lost big money in a previous project. So he had to steal the money from Walker in order to buy his way back into the corporation hierarchy. Borman was explicit that the organization, complete with its bland look and its monolithic skyscraper, is meant as a satire on the large capitalist structures he found in the US when he came here. Its hierarchy goes from the sleazy car lot owner Stegman, terrorized by Walker, right up to the man who signs the checks, that is, Fairfax. And this brings us to John Borman's politics. They leaned left. Born into a lower middle class British household, his father owned a pub, and his mother's father also owned a pub. Borman always called himself a democratic socialist. He was hostile to the cutthroat nature of capitalist economics, where everyone is always after something and the weak have to fend for themselves. He's direct. Quote, "To me, the organization is capitalism as it has developed in the US," unquote. But Borman was hostile too to the resulting American prosperity, its Philistine consumerism. Hence the comedy of Stegman, the car dealer's outrage, as Walker rams the car dealer's new Cadillac to pieces against the colossal pillars supporting a freeway. Oh no, Walker's intentionally wrecking an expensive car. How can that be? Who would do this? Hence, when the TV is on, it's all advertisement. Hence, too, Chris, in a fury at Walker's blank indifference, switches on every household appliance in the suburban house where they're planning an ambush. Borman was actually stunned at the large number of electric appliances Americans had, very different from Britain, and stunned too by their large kitchens, also different from Britain. Borman himself had a long career in film, made about 20, and he grew rich from these films and lived the last half of his life in a house in a remote and beautiful part of Ireland. His first film in Britain was about a Beatles-like British rock and roll band, the Dave Clark Five. And Point Blank itself features psychedelic color-coded scenes and some good psychedelic singing. But that doesn't mean that Borman in 1967 was a champion of the hippies. No, he's old left. The counterculture that appears in Point Blank is as shallow as everything else in Los Angeles. Just kids wildly dancing to rock and roll. Walker, the grim antithesis of a hippie, simply forges grimly through them as unimportant. In John Borman's later hallucinatory science fiction movie Zardoz, 1974, worth seeing, although it's totally weird also, there's a scantily clad Sean Connery taking his revenge on the rich by actually flying around in a huge stone head of Karl Marx. It's something to see, an enormous flying stone copy of the bust of Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery in London. Borman gleefully admits that Zardoz is a Marxist movie. It's the secure elite haves who are immortal versus the desperate have-nots in a post-apocalyptic world. But Borman was no orthodox communist in that sense. He disliked the USSR as he disliked the US as just another version of corporate capitalism. In the case of the USSR, just state capitalism. So classic film noir had a pessimistic view of American society and a leftist suspicion of private power and money. The films were often about society's losers or their mediocrities, motivated by greed to make one big score, usually via a risky proposition. Think of Walter Neff in Double Indemnity. And Point Blank follows that leftist noir tradition. And I'd say that the moral bleakness in Point Blank is intensified because it's set in California, the romantic land of the Golden Dream, turned into a concrete LA nightmare. So I think Point Blank not only retains a noir sensibility, but noir politics. And the politics of noir were pink. Is Point Blank a ghost story? In the crime novel on which Point Blank is based, The Hunter by Donald Westlake, the main character, there called Parker, is clearly alive and real at the end of the book. So alive and real that Parker's adventures were followed in 20 sequels. So he's really alive. And in all the later film remakes of Point Blank, and there were actually 3 film remakes of Point Blank, including ones by Mel Gibson in 1999 and Jason Statham in 2013. In all of these film remakes, the Walker figure is clearly alive, just a standard action hero. But there are many hints in our 1967 film that what we're seeing isn't real. To begin with, Walker's escape from Alcatraz Island is totally implausible. How did the badly wounded Walker, shot twice in the stomach, simply swim across the bay to San Francisco? Or did he? What are the odds against a gravely wounded man being able to make that long, strenuous swim across ice-cold San Francisco Bay? But then suddenly there he is, a year later or so, with gray hair. And at the heart of the film is the plan of Fairfax to eliminate all his rivals within the organization by using a vengeful Walker. This seems excessively complicated, just like evil Gavin Elster's complex plot to kill his wife in Vertigo. Why go through all this effort? Why not just hire a hitman, as Fairfax eventually does? And at the end, Walker simply, so the whole plot is implausible in that sense. And at the end, Walker simply vanishes into blackness, not even bothering to pick up the $93,000 that supposedly motivated him throughout the film and which Fairfax has supposedly finally left for him. No, Walker just vanishes into blackness, and that's the end. And also, the narrative of Point Blank is so fragmented that it's sometimes hard to figure out not only what's going on, but where in time we are. It's like, well, a dream. So some commentators conclude that what we see in Point Blank is all along merely Walker's fantasy, his dream of revenge, as he lies dying on Alcatraz in that cell. It's a controversy similar then to what we saw in Vertigo, which again is much of it is an inspiration for Point Blank. in Vertigo, was it all a dying fantasy of Scotty as he hangs desperately from the roof? Borman, as is typical, delighted in never clearing this up. Sometimes he said that Point Blank was intended to depict real events and was a satire on really existing modern corporatism, Philistine American consumerism, and the crushing of the individual, even ferocious Walker, by huge impersonal institution. Okay. But sometimes Borman said he liked the idea that Walker was dead, only a ghost, and that Point Blank all along was merely Walker's moment of dying fantasy. His favorite response, though, was enigmatic. What it is what you see. Yeah, but what is it that you see? It's hard to understand. But perhaps whether Walker is imagining his revenge or is actually carrying out his revenge is immaterial to the impact of the film as a film. Borman and Lee Marvin wanted to tell a dark and suspenseful story packed with violence and packed with new cinematic ideas, and this they did. Okay, so I want to talk now about the reception of the film. The executives at MGM already knew from the previews in the San Fernando Valley that people didn't understand this film and thought that it had been edited by people who were drunk. So they had never liked the Point Blank project. It was only because Lee Marvin pushed for the film that MGM financing went ahead in the first place. And when the executives themselves saw Borman's finished product, they were appalled by the fractured timeline, disruptive flashbacks, and flashy cinematography. They were all men in their 60s. They feared no one would pay to see this film. The studio, above all, hated the ending and the idea that a hoodlum or anyone would walk away from money. It was illogical unless Walker was dead. Was he dead? Who could tell? So they turned the possibility of savage recutting of the film over to Margaret Booth, the head of the MGM editing department. I doubt that any of you have ever heard of Margaret Booth, but she began her filmmaking career in 1915, right out of high school, working for D.W. Griffith. She'd been with MGM since the 20s, and her talent was so great that she became the head supervising editor of MGM in 1932. That's an astonishing achievement given 1930s misogyny, or for that matter, 1960s misogyny. That's how talented she was. Booth edited the original Mutiny on the Bounty in 1935 and would go on to edit The Way We Were in 1973. For 35 years, she was the final editing authority on every movie MGM made. Again, nobody's heard of her. She was known for traditional tastes, so the MGM executives were sure she would demand that Borman recut Point Blank to make the story more comprehensible, more tidy, because audiences want a tidy story. But it turned out that when Margaret Booth viewed Borman's Point Blank, his cut, sitting alongside Borman himself, she approved his disorienting style. Booth, in fact, became the film's most insistent champion, and it was her authority that saved Point Blank from the bureaucrats' cutting. It didn't hurt that Borman himself had done a documentary on D.W. Griffith, whom Booth still idolized. And you'll remember when we talked about Sunset Boulevard, that Billy Wilder saw the real D.W. Griffith being thrown out of a restaurant as just a sorry drunk, and that was the origin of Sunset Boulevard. So Point Blank had its premiere in San Francisco in late August 1967. MGM advertised it nationally as a film of sex and violence. Quote, There are two kinds of people in this uptight world, his victims and his women, and sometimes you can't tell them apart. The advertising posters featured a scowling Lee Marvin in its huge 44 Magnum. The trailer for the film did the same. It opens with Lee Marvin bursting through Sharon Acker's door, grabbing her and throwing her to the ground, and then firing his huge gun 6 times into her bed. Cut to Walker stomping implacably down the corridor of LAX. Well, it opened in San Francisco during the Summer of Love. There you go. Despite MGM's fears, the film did okay, fairly well, though not spectacularly. Box office receipts were a decent $9 million on an MGM investment of $3 million. But as you know, half of that sum went to the local theaters, the distributors, the exhibitors. So MGM's profit was there, but it was small, about $1 million. Reviews were generally favorable, though conservative critics grumbled at its fractured narrative and disorienting flashbacks. The more progressive critics, though, loved it. But the problem was that in autumn 1967, Point Blank was not released by itself. It was released in the middle of ferocious competition. And Point Blank was competing for business against the rebel movie of all time at that point, Bonnie and Clyde, which also opened in August 1967, the same month as Point Blank. And Bonnie and Clyde was an overwhelming hit with the young. On its original investment of $3 million, it brought in $70 million. Maybe one reason for the difference in box office performance is that Bonnie and Clyde are pretty likable. Walker isn't. The film, though, was highly praised by French critics when it opened in Paris in spring 1968. Coming to theaters just before the huge student protest convulsions of May 68, Point Blank fit with the prevailing chaos. It was more successful in France than in the US. And over the next 20 years, Point Blank gained a cult status both in France and the US. And the crucial moment in saving Point Blank from being forgotten came in 1988 when Point Blank was released on VHS tape. Again, the impact of technology. Millions more people could now see it, renting it from Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, than had ever seen it in theaters when it first came out. And because of that, Point Blank gained a new life. The great film critic David Thompson, though still troubled by some of the film's ambiguities, hailed it as a masterpiece. Well, there's a question for you. Is Point Blank a masterpiece? If so, why? If not, why not? By 1998, again, it's because of Blockbuster, Point Blank's reputation had grown so much that MGM re-released it into actual cinema theaters. Mel Gibson did a remake in 1999, though weirdly, it's a comedy for those of you who have seen it. Strange movie. Fun, though. And MGM, but Gibson in that movie is indestructible in a way that Lee Marvin is not in Point Blank. And MGM re-released Point Blank to theaters again in 2013. So it's had wide influence among younger directors. Michael Mann's terrific crime film Heat, with its 1995, with its desolate LA cityscapes, is impossible to imagine without Point Blank. Steven Soderbergh's The Limey, 1999, and Christopher Nolan's Memento, 2000, excellent films, are essentially Point Blank remakes. Jim Jarmusch, with Ghost Dog, 1995, a terrific movie, said that Point Blank is for him the all-time greatest LA crime film. The all-time greatest LA crime film. Again, because of the setting in this bleak LA desert. Point Blank didn't do well in Britain in 1967. It was censored pretty heavily. But in 2014, the British Film Institute staged a retrospective on all of John Boorman's films, including Point Blank and Zardoz and Deliverance in 1972 and Hope and Glory. Uh, and Walker's actual heavy shoes from LAX and Point Blank were on prominent display at the entrance. Foreman owned them. He bought the shoes. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back for discussion. Michael Schulman had a question about, no, there are two things. The one is right at the beginning, you have that amazing, hugely crowded all-male party going on in which Mal Reese accosts Walker and throws him down on the ground and then gets on top of him, demanding that he work with him. Who knows what that is? It certainly has homoerotic, if not homosexual, overtones. And in the scene in Mal Reese's apartment later, the power overtones are reversed in which Marvin actually is on top of Mal Reese. So they're playing around with that. Is it just power dynamics with Mal Reese in control? I'm not sure, but it's certainly another weird aspect of the movie, especially for 1967. I'm sure people were nonplussed about it. And then Michael Schulman asks, what's the story behind the colored liquids from the bathroom falling and mixing in the bathtub after Marvin breaks them? I don't know. It's a beautiful shot. Maybe it's supposed to be Lynn's blood. I don't know. Okay, so those are the two questions. Let me say for next week, we're doing Dirty Harry, which is easily available every place. And that tells you a lot about the impact of its politics, which we will be talking a lot about next week. Okay, so questions then. Oh yeah, somebody's mentioning Grosse Point Blank, which is point blank set in Grosse Point, Michigan, which of course is a very highly rich area, in which we have John Cusack playing a hitman uh, who kills another hitman with a ballpoint pen. It's a comedy in a grim way, and the best part of that film is when John Cusack is meeting with his psychiatrist, and whether it's a good idea for the psychiatrist to have a hitman as a client is a question that comes up, especially when Cusack doesn't like what the psychiatrist is saying to him, and just says as he's leaving the office, "Just remember, I can find out where you live." So, but it's a comedy. But again, the whole point of it being Grosse Point Blank is that people would know that it's about point blank. It's about hitman. So that the movie has its kind of influence among people who are interested in film. Okay, so questions. Um,
Susan has a question.
Susan, you can get the ball rolling.
Unmute Susan.
Okay.
To me, this is not a brilliant film. It was violence 100% all the way through. I got really tired of it about a quarter of the way through.
Yeah.
My sensibility just doesn't handle this kind of film very well, I guess. And I'm surprised at the kind of unanimous consensus that this is Wonderful. I don't see it that way.
Um, this is the impact of the loosening of the MPAA code. And I think that the character is capable of just sudden rage and violence. And a lot of it is against women, and some of it is against men. Um, but, you know, it's coming at a time, Bonnie and Clyde comes out at the exact same time, and it has that hyper violent ending.
But I liked Violent Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, really? I
Yeah.
thought the ending was really
Yeah,
hard.
the ending was horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also comes out within a couple of weeks of the other Lee Marvin film, The Dirty Dozen, which also has a hyper violent ending uh, in which the Nazi generals are down in this basement and they pour gasoline down the basement and then set it on fire.
Fire. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is not point blank only, but actually what the impact of the loosening of the production code allowed people to do. And you can ask, it's a fair question to ask, Susan, why is the immediate reaction to the loosening of the production code this?
Yeah.
Marjorie.
Hi. So I didn't mind the violence in this film. It didn't bother me. I did find myself feeling totally lost, like I didn't know what was going on. And so this lecture is helpful.
Yeah.
I thought, and I don't know why I thought this, that at the end he didn't take the money because he was afraid they had booby trapped it.
Yes, I thought that was another possibility too. Um, but it's ambiguous.
Yeah, yeah.
Very.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole movie is ambiguous. Cher.
I just wanted to mention briefly, you didn't say this, but Walker doesn't actually kill anyone in the film. I
No,
mean, there's the tossing over the balcony, which is a little ambiguous, but
that was an
everyone
accident.
else kills people, but he doesn't.
That's right. Um, and I don't know whether that makes him more likable or it's an example of the impotence that he has in being able to do anything, in fact. He's as impotent as Scotty in Vertigo in that way.
Yes, in fact, that early scene where he unloads the after he shoots the bed and then unloads the gun is kind of uh, hanging there like the flaccid object that it represents.
There was a conflict over that scene with Borman. Originally, after he unloads the gun, he questions Sharon Acker. He questions Lynn about where is Mal and what's going on. And what Marvin suddenly said on the set was that Walker would not say anything. And so Borman then had to give the questions to Sharon Acker so that she's answering questions that haven't been asked. You know, no, Mal left me. No, I get money every month. Uh, and that was how that part of it was handled. And the argument from Walker was precisely that he'd had his violent orgasm shooting the gun 6 times, and then he was exhausted, and that's why he can't say anything, and he dumps out uh, the bullets. You know, you had to
That
get,
was
you had to be,
perfect
yeah.
that he didn't say anything. I thought that
He
was
didn't say
perfect.
no. He's just staring off into space, and it's um, he's not. I mean, the as a wait, okay. Sylvia, that's actually Bill, I think I'm looking at.
Yes, can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I have a couple of questions. Do you live in San Francisco now?
Berkeley.
Berkeley. Where do you do your research?
Um,
Do you go down to LA and the motion?
uh, no, I'm able to find stuff in books that have been written about it or thinking about film noir in general. I used your book in this particular case in talking about noir versus uh, neo noir.
By the way,
I've got lots of stuff.
I agree with you. I think neo noir is noir all the way. The neo to me it just indicates a change in the two changes allowed by the dropping of the production code, really. So
So why do you think
I'm
people
I'm a lumper myself, I think. You know?
you
But
think it's just being old that we want to be lumpers rather than splitters?
right now, it's all I admire tremendously your close readings of these movies. Bravo.
Thanks. Thank you.
Are they going to become a book? I think I mentioned this last time, but
Yeah.
is this working towards a major book on Hollywood movies or?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, my own feeling is it doesn't make sense that I do all of this stuff and then it's gone.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, I'm taking a lot of stuff from other writers,
Of course, yeah.
bringing them to you and in a kind of synthesis of what people think.
Right.
Um,
So
so I'm not sure how much I don't want to be accused of plagiarism.
no. Well, I don't think anyone listening to your lecture would think of that at all, really. It's very
Oh, that's good. That's good.
and now obviously how obviously you wouldn't pick point blank if you didn't love it at a certain extent, but how in terms of all the noir,
Mm.
do you think it's the best or one of the best? Do you think it's as great as Vertigo? And what do
I think it's a great LA movie. I'm
uh-huh,
not sure it's a great noir movie
uh-huh,
because it is fragmented and that's a style that sometimes it comes and goes in filmmaking. I mean, how I got involved with this, Bill, was that I grew up among screenwriters in North Hollywood,
uh-huh,
and although my parents were just working class people, the and people know this, the my best friends in junior high and high school, their parents were writers for Leave It to Beaver,
right,
and and they were unashamed leftists actually,
right.
and which has given me an impression of the late '50s that's different from a lot of people. Uh,
And what was your at University of Maryland? You were a professor of American history or
nope. I was professor essentially in ancient imperialism,
oh good.
but tenure is a wonderful thing. And the real which enabled me to do anything. And actually, because I did so many things, I ended up getting this hyper uh, university distinguished professor. So when I was 10 years old, I saw John Ford's The Searchers. And like many sensitive 10 years old people, I was deeply affected by that. It's true of Scorsese and Spielberg and Lucas.
Right.
And that led me all along to be fascinated by film as something that could create enduring art, that could be entertaining, but was classic in the sense that 70 years later, it's still worth seeing.
Yeah, great.
And so that led me to that. And eventually I wrote a book about the searchers. And I actually discovered the screenplay, which showed how different the screenplay was from what you see on film. And in every case, John Ford darkened the Ethan Edwards character, the John Wayne character.
Great.
Made him more racist, more violent, more in love with his brother's wife, all of that stuff. So it was seeing, the The parents of my best friends were certainly idealistic leftists, but they ended up not only doing Leave It to Beaver, but uh, Flipper about a talking dolphin. And that taught me a lot about Hollywood too, what you have to do to survive. Even though Ann Marcus, the mother, went on to win an Emmy for Mary Hartman, when things had really loosened up. But in the late 50s and early 60s, they were doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and they objected to having to do this stuff, but survival was survival.
Right, right.
So,
Well,
Art, Richard has posted a comment on chat for you.
Okay. A lot of the questions people are asking seem to be what one asks about a film with a lot of directorial or screenplay flaws. It seems like the film's success was due more to a lot of coincidences of timing rather than the quality of the film or filmmaking. I found it, aside from its connection to the genre we're studying, to be just plain tedious and frankly boring. Wow, I certainly didn't feel that myself. And to go back a little bit to Bill's question, why did I assign this film? I loved it when it came out in 1967, so I thought it'd be worth looking at again. So I didn't think it was boring, and I think that the Lee Marvin the images of Lee Marvin were just tremendously dramatic, even though and his lack of emotion was itself kind of fascinating, especially in summer '67. I was a hippie, so it was amazing to see somebody who had no emotion, and who is this hyper masculine, toxic masculine figure, except he's actually really weak. No, I didn't find it boring. And I think the film, you can see that people have different reactions to it. And Susan thought it was ultra violent, and Richard thought it was boring. So, yeah, Jim.
Art, I just want to say that just like Vertigo, your lecture today is really driving me to go watch the movie again now with a
Uh,
whole different perspective, and maybe I'll be able to see some things that I clearly didn't notice in both of these movies. So I just say, thank you for your insights there.
okay, that's
Great,
great.
and really raised my awareness and curiosity about what they were really all about.
I would say look at the visuals, what he does with Los Angeles, what he does with the LA River aqueduct thing, this huge blank area with that slope where the guy gets killed. And the and remember, it was in Panavision, so this would have been just enormously wide scope. And in terms of thinking about how a British person would react to California, he, he said it was the monumentality of the skyscrapers in Los Angeles amid all the flat area that just amazed him and that he wanted to put on screen.
I
So
thought the scene with the clopping feet through the airport that went on and on for a while, like you mentioned, was really fabulous.
it is because you hear that clomping even when
Yeah.
Rachel's just waking up, when she's doing things. you know, uh, it's terrific. Except, when he finally arrives, Mal isn't there, and Lynn disappears, and he's left actually with no clues about what's going on, except from what Fairfax tells.
And Art, there's a question from Mark and Barbara.
I see it. Okay, Mark.
Um, so I was just going to comment in a way. I'm thrilled that Bill is here. Bill Park is here
Me too.
because in his course on Michael Connolly, which we've just concluded,
Yeah.
he encouraged me to read the first volume, first novel that Connolly published called Black Echo. And in Black Echo, there are scenes in that system of tunnels and drainage and things where they tunnel under the ground to get into a bank. And the fact that that shows up in this film and
Yeah.
the linkage between California Noir and Michael Connelly
Yeah.
is astounding. It's just amazing to me. So
Well,
thank you all both.
I mean, I think the Bosch TV series also had a lot of that. You know, he's living in this house that overlooks flat LA that just stretches on forever. And that's right out of Point Blank. You know, it's the ability of someone who grew up in Little England to suddenly arrive at a place with vast plains existing and really being in shock. He was in shock at the monumentality of everything that he saw in Los Angeles, and which he didn't see in San Francisco, which he thought was a kind of cozy little place. And so, yes.
Sorry, a couple more chats for you to have a look
Okay,
at.
let's see.
Shelley, I think is first there.
What's the I see. Speaking of Shelley says I didn't see much emotion uh, in Lee Marvin. Um, you know, he doesn't have a large range. I think that's actually true. Um, but apparently, working with the director, he was able to get a lot of his own trauma out, and he's traumatized into catatonia in a way. But even as an actor in all of this stuff, he was much better uh, as a villain, as a straight out villain. He was really easy to hate in The Big Heat, really easy to hate in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Um, and he's not a very heroic figure. I just say another movie that he made called Prime Cut in 1972, which is Sissy Spacek's first movie. They had to go back and reshoot scenes because in the original script, he as Lee Marvin, who's a hitman, rejects Sissy Spacek. And the fact is, no one ever rejects Sissy Spacek. And the audience reaction, I actually have the director's notes. Said the audience reaction was hostile to the idea that he would just get rid of her, and so they develop a romance. And you know what? She's 20 and he's 53. So she and the point in Prime Cut is that her character is able to unlock some of his frozen feelings. And I think Chris fails at that in Point Blank. But then I think Sissy Spacek is a much better actress than Dickinson.
Art Share, sorry, Art
All
Share
of
has,
the, oh,
Shelley.
just to finish off, it's not that I thought that his acting was inappropriate for this particular film. It's just that it's the first time I've actually seen a Lee Marvin performance, and I, judging just from this one and what you say about it, you know, that he was a great actor, very famous at a certain point, but I didn't see any evidence of his being a great actor, just of going
Yeah.
through the motions. That was just my thought. But
Maybe I'll revise it and say a great looking actor.
well, he was very fit.
Very fit, yeah. I think Cher has her
Looked good in a suit.
with a big gun.
very fit. And I mean, and as a person, he jumped into San Francisco Bay when the stuntman would not.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It's incredible. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Of course, that part of the story is also incredible. But, yeah. Looks
Has her hand up.
Cher, or who else has their hand up?
Well, Cher does.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention a little bit more about the cinematography.
Yeah,
You mentioned the wide open spaces, and I thought the cinematography was the best part of the film.
yeah, me too.
I did find it confusing and went back and watched it a second time and then appreciated it more. So
Okay.
folks may want to consider doing that. Like most films, I think. Good films you almost have to see more than once.
Um,
But the thing I want to bring up was that I thought the director did some interesting things by kind of transforming the classic film noir convention of the Venetian blind. There are a
yeah,
whole lot of shots. In fact, right, I think in maybe near the opening
yeah,
credits, we see Lee Marvin from above looking through some grates.
right.
And there are other times, like when the shooting out in the um, water ducts
Bill.
happens. He's looking through some interesting
Yeah.
screens there. But my favorite shot was when he's looking down at the used sales car lot and he's looking through a kind of classic suburban screen
Right.
door or something. And it's focusing partly on him and the screen door at the same time, and then it refocuses onto just his face. But that idea of the Venetian blind becoming the suburban screen in the transition from classic noir to neo-noir, I thought was fabulous.
One of the things as an
Yes.
example of what Borman did is there's a scene where Lee Marvin and Angie Dickinson are scoping out where Mal Reese lives, and they're down at the cliffs by Pacific Palisades, and they use a telescope, and the telescope is yellow. No telescope is yellow.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's so. I mean, this is also the kind of thing that people said it's just a fantasy that he's having. She's dressed in yellow. The
Yeah.
telescope is yellow. Uh, there's a scene with one of the gangsters where everything is green. The men are dressed in kind of dull green suits, and there's a dull green uh, paint paint job in the office. Uh, that all of that. I mean, one way to think about it is he was too much. That Borman was too much influenced by Vertigo. That he was using a lot of Vertigo tricks to do all of these things because he found it fascinating to be able to do. It was very daring of him to do all of this because he knew that the MGM executives didn't want to make this film to begin with. They didn't know who he was. He and Marvin had met in London and had gotten drunk together and had looked over the script. And then Marvin had literally thrown the script out the hotel window and said, write another script and I'll do the film. It's a great idea. And it's only because of Lee Marvin that that made the film. I'd say Marvin's influence, probably his most important thing, is that it was his imprimatur that allowed Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch to go forward.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, and Susan, if you want a movie that's violent, if you don't want a movie that's violent, I'm not going to show The Wild Bunch, which is ultra violent movie. And again, one can ask, where is this violence coming from? So actually, The Wild Bunch was made in 1968. It's released in 69, but it was made in 68. That as soon as the MPAA code is changed, yeah, there's some sexuality, but it's violence that people turn to. That's what gets on the screen, and it's all over. It's a,
Well,
it's
I'm going
a,
to go back and watch this one again in light of what's been said today, and hopefully it'll come to me differently.
well, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's all right too.
That's
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 all right. Nothing
perfectly,
lost.
yeah, that's perfectly okay. Uh,
Art, a comment and question from Michael. Michael.
yeah, I see that the fighting quality seemed really amateurish. So was the shooting. When did films start to hire actual fight choreographers and make this part of the film more realistic or graphic? Certainly more graphic Um, the shooting was really up to Marvin. He was actually the expert since he'd been in the Marines and had fought in savage battles in World War II. He was controlling the gunplay, and he, as I said, you'll see when next week with Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry shoots that gun, and there's no recoil, very little recoil. And Marvin knew that wasn't true with those huge guns. But he also exaggerated it to make the idea that Walker was actually uh, being smashed by his desire for revenge. That shooting just, was doing that to his hand. But that's not to excuse Susan the violence. There, obviously, they thought it was a selling point, and the advertising is much more saying, come and see the violence than what Lee Marvin himself intended.
Well, isn't that a safe assumption to make because violence does sell movies?
Yeah,
That hasn't changed ever.
no. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that is, Susan?
Good question. I have 3 boys. I don't know. They
They
didn't.
interest,
I'm just gonna say when they went to, I think the young boys in the ages from my maybe 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, they love anything that's weird, violent, juicy. Um, I don't know why. Maybe
uh,
it's a way of allowing yourself a forbidden interest. You can't do violence in public, certainly.
I think, if you think about the audience of ordinary people sitting there watching Lee Marvin at 50 feet tall on the screen doing these things, it's a fantasy that people can have, and it's a safe fantasy.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's why my grandson likes dinosaurs. They're big, they're mean, and they're not here.
Well, that's what I was getting at, kind of, and it's that period of fantasy that I think boys do go through. Dinosaurs and fast cars, and
Yeah.
I think violence is a part of that.
Um, there was a very good article by Sasha Stone describing what happened last Saturday at the
Correspondence dinner.
correspondence dinner.
Yeah.
She said what she saw was the men suddenly becoming masculine and stepping up to protect the women, even though there was not actually,
Some.
and that she thought it was some kind of DNA instinct to that she'd never seen anything like that, and she had one guy just step in front of her and say, "Don't worry, I'll protect you."
Wow.
Yeah, so she was impressed with that, but I think Susan is right that it's some sort of, myself, I think it's some sort of DNA thing. Richard, you're the psychiatrist. You can tell us.
Are you muted, Richard?
You need to unmute.
Yes, Richard, unmute, please.
Unmute, Dick.
Oh,
Well,
well.
well,
Okay.
There you go.
oh, there.
I have one question. Is there any way of knowing whether the appeal of the movie was skewed towards the male viewers and not appealing to the female viewers so much?
Yes.
I would assume that that would be the case.
Well, it appealed to me and not to Susan.
Okay,
All right.
I'll leave that one alone. Uh, the other thing is there's a lot of research about if you put men into a situation where they can express or display the hostility and negative side of them, they will do that.
Yeah.
The Zimbardo experiments where guards, pseudo guards, became abusive of the people they were guarding. So there's a lot of evidence that left to their own devices, the genes, as you say, the masculine gene trends towards being or has the potential for expressing violent and negative aspects of it. And maybe seeing a movie that displaces, allows them to view hostility and aggression in a way that isn't them. They can maybe get some sort of relief or scratch that itch, if you will.
Uh,
Interesting.
I have a response to that, but I think Shelley needs to.
I was speaking of sex and violence. The sex was, I thought the sex was negligible. The only thing that was even slightly sensual was where Reese is unbuttoning the front of her dress. Everything else was just, all of the women looked extremely uptight. It's not like in Double Indemnity where she was clearly trying to be a sex bot.
Yeah.
These were just so, they just looked very prim. And the whole, everything about the sex, except as I say, when he's unbuttoning the front of her dress, was so hugely unsensual. So true. There was nothing about actually they're being attracted. Certainly, it was just super unsensual. That's all.
Yeah, I think actually the relationship between Angie Dickinson and the Lee Marvin character was not very believable. But she wanted to get some kind of reaction out of him, and the sex scene where they're changing into these various people. The point is not the sex; it's the
No,
transformation.
that was interesting. I thought that was a really interesting thing, and that certainly didn't bother me. But and it
But why
wasn't
would you do
about sex.
that?
It was about cinematography and fantasy and confusion. But
Confusion.
Fusion, sure.
Confusion. Yeah, I mean, because you could think of them. If I'm the director, I said, okay, we're going to have a sex scene, and then this is the result: is this very confusing and people exchanging identities, and I think they just Borman just said, "Ha ha, this is where we're going." He wasn't interested in sexuality, although he is in Zardoz.
I thought even the unbuttoning of her dress was done in kind of a business-like manner.
it was. It's true.
Say that again. I missed that. I
It's
missed
true.
I thought even how he was unbuttoning her dress was done in a business-like manner. It wasn't.
that. Business like man.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. This is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
All right,
Oh,
Art. Well, maybe we're sort of out of time.
Okay.
Maybe we should say
Uh,
goodbye.
So next week we're doing Dirty Harry and the politics on in this, as well as the violence and who the villain is and who the hero is and what the nature of San Francisco Police Department actually was in 1970. It's all very interesting to see.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Art.
again. Thank you very much.
Wonderful talk. Wonderful.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.